Hi, I'm Sue Harper from River Crane Framing. Today, my husband is going to interview me. So I'm going to hand it over to him now to do the questioning. Dave.
Thanks, Sue. And yes, really interested in your story about how River Crane Framing came about. So, well, what is the story? Why did you get into picture framing?
Well, Dave, I was in corporate IT for years and I loved it. We traveled around the world. We did lots of interesting things. I did a lot of teaching. And in the background, I had my camera and I was taking photographs. Picture framing was nowhere on the scene. And it wasn't even something that I thought about doing when I grew up. But I did have a colleague and we used to say, oh, when I'm 50, I don't want to be doing this anymore. I'm going to be doing my other job. And we had no idea what the other job would be. We did think about all kinds of things. But I took a year out. I had a sabbatical and I did some drawing classes and some painting classes and some carpentry. And I had done picture framing prior to that. I'd done some picture framing so that I could frame the photographs that I was selling, so that I could frame the photographs to sell them. And I sold a few, but there was no ways I was going to be able to make that a living. I couldn't make the numbers work. And I'd lie awake at night and think, how many photographs do I need to sell to pay the mortgage? So after my sabbatical, I went back to corporate IT and carried on. And I also then started framing more. And the more I framed, the more people said, won't you do this for me? Could you help me with that frame? And when the part-time job that I was working on came to an end, I had to look around for new work. You suggested that I consider the framing, and it had never occurred to me that I could make it as a living. And so I thought, I'll give it 6 months. I'll see if there are numbers, if there are enough people who'd be interested in my framing to make it a living. And here I am.
So are you saying that it was your passion to do this?
It wasn't my passion at all. It kind of evolved, and it really never occurred to me that I would do this. It never occurred to me that I would be able to run my own business. When you work in corporate IT, everyone thinks for you and you just do, you arrive, you get paid. And we worked hard, but doing all the finance and planning and running my own business was just too daunting a thought that I would even be able to do it. So, as I say, it evolved. And passion? No, it wasn't a passion, but I do love the variety and I do love what I do now.
So not quite a passion, but you enjoy what you're doing. One of the aspects we had in the corporate world was we were working with lots of people across the world all the time. What happens now? Is it just you in the workshop? Do you work alone?
It is just me in the workshop. And in fact, that's something that you and I discussed with photography. When I was thinking that I would be a photographer when I grew up, that might be a really lonely job because I wasn't going to do portrait photography. I was focusing on landscape photography, and my thinking was that I'd go for long walks and take photographs and sell them. And so yes, I do work alone and I work in my workshop. But the joy of my job is that I work from home. And so my clients come to me and we have a talk about the photographs. And that's the bit I like. Photographs, whatever the art is. If I'm framing a child's pair of first shoes, then I'm talking about the story that goes behind them. And there's always a story. And so I've got to know my clients. And some come back, year on year, they go on a holiday and then they come back with new pictures and they bring me the pictures. Others have sad stories or happy stories, and I hear them and I frame those stories. That's why my strapline is making memories last. So that's the passion, is that actually I do work with people. And then, of course, I teach.
Okay, so you sort of told us a little bit about what you do. So could you describe a typical week?
There isn't a typical week. There isn't a typical week.
That's a good thing.
It is really interesting for me because one of the things that right at the beginning, when I started framing, I was happy to get 1 or 2 pieces a month. And then somebody told me about knowing my numbers and being aware of what I'd need to have. And so I started thinking about pipeline and actually even knowing what pipeline meant. And I started doing a few bits and pieces of advertising, just maybe through social media, you helped me set up a web page and so on. The thing about framing is that people look for framers within an area. So for example, they look for Twickenham framers. And so they'll find me and a few others. And then they decide whether they want high street or local. So people come to me, and I don't know from one week to the next who is going to come. I might do more advertising to get more people in. So I have regular calls for people to set up appointments. So some days in the week, I'll have an appointment with somebody coming in. I try not to overlap appointments too much so people can have time to talk. I teach privately. So I teach, well, before COVID, I would have somebody in the workshop and I would teach. So I do a whole day teaching. I teach at the local college. And so Mondays typically is a bit of teaching. On the rest of the week, I try and frame. I do a bit of voluntary work here and there. And the variety of framing is vast. I might be framing photographs, I might be framing pastels, I might be framing 3D objects, medals and that kind of thing, tapestries, embroidery. So there's a variety of what I do framing wise, size wise, and the people that I encounter.
Wow, sounds an interesting week. But you're not having people into the workshop at the moment. So you're now doing more teaching online. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the interesting thing is that one of the things that somebody said to me ages ago, back to the knowing your numbers, is that you need to know what you're chasing and looking to finish in a year. And with COVID, I could clearly not have customers coming in. And so I started doing a little bit of studying. I did a few amazing online courses, really interesting courses. And one of them was a painting course. And I just loved it. It was watercolors online. And for 3 hours on a Monday afternoon for 12 weeks, I painted. And I just loved it. She would show us the techniques, the watercolor techniques, and then she would show us how to mix the paints. And we were only allowed 6 colors. In fact, 2 reds, 2 yellows, 2 blues, and we had to mix all these other colors, and it was so thoroughly enjoying. And I painted at the same time. So we did an hour of demonstration, and then you painted for a couple of hours, and then sharing and interaction. And it occurred to me from these different courses that I was doing that it might be possible to teach picture framing online. And I'd had a few people who were hoping to start their own businesses and said, could I help? And so I approached them and said, do you want to give it a go? Shall we try a couple of hours, free online teaching? And I kind of downloaded my brain onto them for framing a 3D box frame. And we did 2 hours free online. And they went, yep, this is great. And so I said, okay, should we do a course? And so I did the first course was a 3-week, 6-session, 2-hour session course with them, which is great. And then I followed up with another course. And the second course that I did online was targeted at people who want to start a framing business, whether they were starting with nothing, no tools, or whether they had some tools and were going to take their business forward. So we looked at business issues. We looked at all the types of things that you might frame, from fabrics to canvases, single mounts, double mounts, all those kinds of things. But also how you would approach finding customers and so on. And we did that over 5 weeks. It was probably a bit intense. I should probably lengthen them and allow people the space to practice and work as well. But I loved it, and I think they really enjoyed it. And it's amazing that it can work interactively online. So I'm teaching again, but now I'm teaching beginners at the moment.
Okay, with that in mind, have you got any other courses in mind? So if I was interested in taking one of your courses in picture framing or starting a new picture framing business, what courses do you offer?
I think the snag that always comes about is that you would need equipment. And so I'm targeting a signature course, if you like. And my signature course is the professional picture framer. And I'd like that to be a reasonably long course where we do maybe 6 to 10 weeks of online training, and you would need equipment for that. And some of the outlay for professional equipment can be substantial. You can spend, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 pounds, even on secondhand equipment, which is quite daunting if you don't know if you're going to be a picture frame. And in fact, I started with a ruler, a framing ruler and a beveled edge cutter and a self-healing mat. And I did that for quite a few years before I even realized that there were these mount cutters available. So I think if you were starting with nothing, that a nice introductory course would work. And I'm running a few over the next few months of introductory courses. And then that would lead you into deciding whether you want to take it further. Potential downside is if you bought a small mount cutter and then you realize that you would like a much bigger one, is that you would have already bought a little one. But as I say, I for years worked on a small mount cutter and found that quite adequate. And a lot of the framing companies do a thing called chop service where they'll cut the wood for you. So there are a lot of ways that we could work around you having to buy a lot of equipment from the outset. And you could get a feel for whether this is something that you actually liked. But I bet if you were interested and you said to a friend or a neighbor or family, I'm thinking about doing some picture framing, their response would be, I have a picture in the attic, you can frame that.
Excellent, thank you. Now, being in IT, I've attended a lot of online courses. Some have been very good, some have been pretty poor. So why do you think you can help others in this online environment?
I think I'm a good teacher. I think that that's my superpower, if you like. And the reason I'm using the word superpower is that one of the courses that I did last year, we although it was a social media course and was focused on social media, the social media was actually a small component of it. The much bigger component of that was trying to work on your mindset, trying to be positive about the abundance of people in the world. Because a lot of people say to me, why would you be teaching people how to frame? You'll lose your own audience. And I think, no, there are loads and loads of people who might be down the road from you who you could teach. And there's different aspects of teaching. So to answer your question, every job that I've had since I was at school ended up me teaching in some way or other. So although I went down the road of writing courses for the company that I worked in when I first arrived in the UK, I ended up delivering the courses. I ended up delivering seminars. And even when we joined the church, I ended up teaching English as a foreign language or trying to do a little English cafe. And with the framing, I love the framing. And then, you know, I said to one of the framing companies that taught me, can I teach for you? I'd love to teach for you. And so I've taught for them for years. So I think that running through my core is being able to teach. And I really like the interaction. So although I do have a component of my course, which is video that you can go and revise after I've done a live session, the thing that I like about the live session are the questions that come up, is the interaction with people, how they look at things. They might ask me and I think, oh, never even thought of that. But I do think that a lot of people enjoy my style. And so that gives me confidence. And having run the course a few times, it gives me confidence that there will be people who will enjoy joining my courses, even though they're not in the workshop with me.
Okay, so some people enjoy your style, most definitely. So have you got some specifics of how you're helping individuals? Have you got some stories there?
Well, I do. There have been a couple of people who found themselves possibly at the end of their careers. Typically, people get to, you know, their late 50s, and you don't think once you get to your late 50s that your job might come to an end. And people are often made redundant in that last little phase. You think you're going to work, you know, from 59 through to 65 or whatever it is. And look at us, we're all, you know, young, strong and fit. No, we're not, we're nearly 60. But actually, I still feel as though I've got a lot to offer. And I, in fact, changed to picture framing once I'd been in my 50s. They used to say to me, you're never going to get a job once you turn 50, so you better sit tight where you are because nobody's going to employ a woman over 50. I think women over 50 get a bit grumpy. Anyway, the story is that I did get a number of jobs after I turned 50 based on the fact that I was older. But it can be tricky moving at that last, in your 59, 60s into a new job. And so that's why picture framing suits really well. And one of my customers indeed was made redundant and was looking to take his hobby further. But I've also had a few younger folk who are interested, who like to dabble. And so they dabble in the evenings after their day jobs. And they seem to love it more and more, and the more they work in it. So I've got quite a few youngsters. And in fact, I noticed somebody that I taught years ago answering questions on one of the framing forums recently. And I thought, isn't that nice? He's done well. He's clearly got his own business running. And he's at a point where he is helping others, which is really great.
Okay, so whatever position I might be in, thinking about, well, this sounds interesting. How would I get in touch and find out a little bit more?
Well, the easiest thing is to go to my website. And there is a link to sign up to subscribe to a newsletter. And there's a choice there of just getting daily framing news or getting more detail about workshops. And if you sign up for the workshops, then I'll be in touch and can tell you more.
Excellent, thank you. One thing that does come up, you get phone calls quite regularly from people saying, can you give me a quote for a 20 by 30 frame? Why don't you like giving quotes over the phone?
I think this is an interesting, so this is away from the teaching. So the other part of my business is the actual framing. And I think some of the snag is that we often can go into a shop, a high street store, and buy a frame for not a lot of money. You might pick up a frame for 20 or 30 pounds, a very nice frame with a piece of glass and a backboard. And what you do at home is that you bend the pins back, you put your picture in, and you stand it up, job's done. Why is picture framing so expensive? So people phone for quotes, or people contact framers for an online quote, often because they want to gauge where you are price-wise. Are you a £20 person? Are you a £100 person? Or are you a £200 person? And why is framing so expensive? And my argument is that you're coming to a bespoke framer because we're going to talk about your story. We're going to find out what it is behind this particular object. And then, regrettably, I've seen people take a beautiful pastel, for example, pastel drawing, and put it into a frame like that, right up against the glass. And that is just going to cause the pastel damage. And so, I have over the years had different pastels brought in where the glass is all smudged with the art, and or the picture is starting to deteriorate. So you go to a bespoke framer because you have a strange sized object, you have maybe a 3D object, you have a picture that doesn't fit into a frame that you can buy on the high street. That's one thing. So I cut the wood to size to suit. But when somebody says, please, can you give me a quote for a frame? I often say, I need the dimensions at least. And then they'll say to me, oh, it's just an A4 black frame. Well, if it's that, I would suggest that you go to your high street and buy the frame. But I do standard frames. It's just that I have a whole section of black frames, and they vary in price. So if you phone me for a quote and I say, oh, it's going to be £87, you could go online and find something for £50. You could go to the framer down the high street and find something for £90, and then you decide on me because I've given you a better price than the framer in the high street, but it's not as cheap as the guy online. But actually, you don't know whether the ones that you're comparing are actually equal. One black frame isn't the same as the next black frame. So I find that when I give quotes online, invariably there isn't a follow through. And so I do quite a lot of work to try and research and try and get you the best materials and pricing. And I don't often even get a follow-up, thank you, but no, thank you. What I do like is when people bring me a piece, they know that they're not going to get away with £50, for example. generally the frames will be more expensive here, because I try to frame to the Fine Art Trade Guild standards, which means that I really want to look after your art and take care of it. So my ideal customer is somebody who will bring a piece knowing that I'm going to look after it, knowing that they're going to get the bespoke service, and knowing that they have something special to hang on the wall for years to come. And they also know that they're probably going to be spending more than £100 on it. And so when that feeling comes in, a lot of my customers then just drop the artwork off with me. And now with COVID, they drop it off with me, and we do a video conference call afterwards to look at the designs.
So the value that you give is in your experience and advice, which often can't be done over the phone in a quick quote. So thank you for that. So lastly, why are you doing this podcast?
Well, I have now been working with a few framers who are starting up their businesses, and I would like to hear from them. I would like to advertise their businesses. There are quite a few of us, rather surprisingly, who work from home. At the moment, our London branch meeting has been meeting online in Zoom, and we're not really London branch anymore. We're kind of countrywide, and that's the Trade Guild branch meetings. And it's so good to share problems. It's so good to share what works for us. It was really good to share how we were going to continue trying to work in this COVID situation. And so there are a number of friends. I would love to know their story, how they started, and to share that with you. So I'm doing this by way of example. The video interviews will probably be shorter, but I do want to know how individuals are working and the different spaces and the kinds of customers they want to see. So the next podcast will hopefully be with fellow framers.
I look forward to reviewing some of those interviews. Thank you very much, Sue.
Thanks, Dave.